When you raised concerns as an investigator, how was that received?
Madam Chair, yes, the document I wrote was an answer to a request from the Minnesota Office of Legislative Auditor asking for a summary of fraud trends that I saw in CCAP. And I prepared it, and as soon as I gave it to some higher officials in Minnesota, the first official that received it became very angry and said, "You can't send this. This is going to make us look bad." And I think my response was, we're losing over $100 million a year just in this
Senate
program
committee
alone.
hearing is a textbook, glaring example of why big government is fundamentally broken, inherently corrupt, and a massive waste of hard-earned taxpayer dollars. The testimony from the veteran investigator is absolutely infuriating. When a dedicated public servant exposes massive fraud within a state childcare program, his superiors don't thank him or rush to fix the problem. Instead, they get angry and explicitly tell him to hide the data because it makes the agency look bad. This is exactly what conservatives mean when they warn about a bloated bureaucracy. These government officials care more about optics, protecting their budgets, and avoiding accountability than they do about safeguarding the citizens' money.
Again, we want to thank our witnesses for being here today. So, Mr. Swanson, I'm just going to continue with some of the work that you have done. In your testimony, you had described preparing a report for the Minnesota Inspector General, citing approximately $100 million or more in Minnesota's Child Care Assistance Program fraud. And I hear your report was not warmly welcomed by your superiors. So would you share with the committee what happened after that? You touched upon it in your opening remarks, but if you could just do a deep dive for us and understand, when you raised concerns as an investigator, how was that received?
Madam Chair, yes, the document I wrote was an answer to a request from the Minnesota Office of Legislative Auditor asking for a summary of fraud trends that I saw in CCAP. And I prepared it, and as soon as I gave it to some higher officials in Minnesota, the first official that received it became very angry and said, "You can't send this. This is going to make us look bad." And I think my response was, we're losing over $100 million a year just in this program alone. I think we probably deserve to look bad. And then they demanded that I redact most of the most damaging paragraphs from that document, and that's when I told them that I think what you're telling me to do is illegal. Under Minnesota law, we have to cooperate with the legislative auditor. And then a few days later, that official came back to my office and told me that your document's being transmitted to the legislative auditor, but you better be ready for the blank storm that's coming. And from that point on, our entire unit was harassed and vilified for what I put in that document. And again, what they termed the continuous improvement project started with a meeting of our entire team, a lead or head continuous improvement official, and an assistant commissioner at the Department of Human Services. And for approximately 30 minutes, we were verbally beat down, in essence told that we were incompetent and we were worthless employees. And because of that, they were going to do a close look at how our unit operated, and they would attempt to fix our unit. And so we spent literally the next 6 months in meetings with this official where he would ask us questions repeatedly about how the investigative process worked. And then he would give us, quote, homework assignments that would take up a whole bunch of our time between the meetings, and then we would have to report back. And I said this went on for 6 months until in June of 2019, he came out with the changes that were going to be made to the system, and starting with the lead investigator, or the supervisor of this unit, and I, who between us, we had 70 years of criminal investigative experience. We would no longer be making the decision what child care centers would be investigated. Again, that would be done by a committee of 3, 2 with no experience in this area, and then myself. Then the second thing he directed was that we would be focusing 50% of our time on child care centers receiving very little funding, which meant that we would be spending 50% less time on centers that received $1 million or more a year in funding, because frankly, the cases we were choosing, because we couldn't investigate all the cases, we focused on those high dollar cases, and we were finding fraud right and left with centers that we were paying over $1 million a year to, and we couldn't fathom why somebody would take 50% of our time away from that and focus it on providers receiving less funding.
Right, and it's a real problem, and as many of you have stated or insinuated, that any dollar taken away from valuable programs is a real problem for those families that expect to receive those services and those dollars. So thank you for the testimony. And Mr. Rosiak, DOJ had released Medicaid data that allows anyone to follow the money, And you followed it to what appeared to be a $1 billion per year Medicaid fraud scheme in Columbus, Ohio. How hard was it for you to go out there and find what would be fishy-looking buildings or something that didn't seem right? Was it really, really difficult, and it took you a lot of time to find these fraudsters?
No, it was actually quite easy. Once the data was there, it's some basic coding, especially with AI now, it's not hard to do. What's remarkable is the fact that nobody else has done it before, none of the government bureaucrats. I mean, you have Nick Shirley, who didn't have a budget, but he has 2 eyes and an iPhone, and he found things that government bureaucrats maybe they weren't allowed to go see it by their superiors. For whatever reason, they were never inspecting it. So number one, I think these agencies are collecting the data, but never using it. And apparently you have to actually get permission from HHS to mine your own data as a state, which is crazy. And not all states have even asked permission for that. So they're just recording who they pay out to, but they're never looking into it. And so you have pay and chase model, but they're not even chasing. And so you want to stop that money going out on the front end, and you also want to acknowledge that as powerful as data is, fraudsters lie. So you've got to do these on-the-ground visits because what the government has in its spreadsheet may not correlate with what you see on the ground.
Very good. Well, I do want to thank everybody for coming out today. And Ranking Member Markey, thank you very much for participation today as well. I think we can acknowledge that our federal government has many really good, solid programs. And Ms. Bernstein, I want to thank you for sharing your personal story as well, because it just shows how important these dollars are for the right usage in these programs. And many of them truly believe in these programs. So we want to make sure that those dollars are going for the right use within the programs. And if they are not, then we need to hold those folks accountable. So I really do appreciate the discussion today. We appreciate the entire panel coming out and sharing their experiences. I will ask that unanimous consent that today's hearing, the record of today's hearing, remain open for 2 weeks for members to submit questions, revise and extend their remarks, and submit additional information into the record, and without objection, so ordered. And further, I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record first, a letter from my office dated May 20th of 2026 requesting the SBA.
When the investigator refused to participate in a cover-up, the establishment did what it always does. It retaliated. They subjected his entire unit to a continuous improvement project, which was nothing more than a months-long campaign of verbal harassment and bureaucratic busywork designed to waste their time. Worse yet, the higher-ups stripped the seasoned investigators of their authority and handed decision-making power over to a committee where the majority had absolutely zero experience. They deliberately ordered investigators to stop looking at the high-risk cases where fraud was rampant, forcing them to focus on tiny entities instead. This is intentional sabotage of oversight to keep the gravy train moving. The testimony from the investigative reporter further proves that the government is utterly useless at auditing itself. By using basic data coding, an independent journalist easily tracked down a massive Medicaid fraud scheme. When asked if it was difficult to find these fraudsters, his answer was a resounding no. The data was right there. Independent watchdogs with an iPhone and 2 eyes are doing the job that thousands of highly paid, pension-backed federal employees are refusing to do. The government uses a pay and chase model, but they aren't even chasing. To top off this ridiculous display of federal overreach, the hearing revealed that states actually have to ask the federal government for permission just to look at their own data to catch fraudsters. This centralized control does nothing but hamstring local authorities and create a protective shield for criminals milking the system. The message here is crystal clear. The federal government is too big to manage itself. When you create endless multi-million and billion-dollar programs with zero accountability, you don't help the vulnerable. You create a playground for fraudsters and a protective shield for corrupt bureaucrats who actively punish honesty. It's time to drastically slash these bloated budgets, strip away the red tape, and hold these agencies accountable to the American taxpayer.